First of all, everybody, welcome to our fireside chat entitled Losing Your Cool: How Anger Impacts Judgment, Advocacy, and Professionalism. And we're excited to have you join us today for a discussion with Dr. Shawn Healy and Luz Carrion, attorney Luz Carrion, and I will introduce them momentarily. I'm Amy Levine, Director of Programs and Volunteers at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, and I will be the facilitator for today. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to remind you about the confidential and free services LCL offers to support the well-being of the Massachusetts legal community. These include one-on-one consultations with licensed clinicians for mental health and substance use concerns, support groups, educational programs, and one-on-one consultations with our law practice advisor, Luz, on firm management and professionalism. Just a few housekeeping notes. We love and encourage questions, so we're going to get to those at the end of the conversation, and please use the chat function for those. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, Dr. Shawn Healy is a clinical psychologist and the Director of Administrative Operations at LCL. He provides individual consultations for law students, lawyers, judges, and legal professionals, and regularly presents and publishes on mental health topics affecting the legal community. Prior to joining LCL, he had his own practice and worked at the May Institute for about 10 years after receiving his Ph.D. in clinical psychology from Suffolk University. He is a certified mental health first aid trainer, co-chairs the Massachusetts Bar Association's Association on Lawyer Wellbeing, Committee, and co-authored The Full Weight of the Law: How Legal Professionals Can Recognize and Rebound from Depression. He also leads our ADHD support group and conducts workshops. Next is Luz. She joined LCL in May of 2023 as a senior law practice advisor. She coaches attorneys on practice management, including technology, law firm finance, office management, and ethics, just to name a few. She supports lawyers through key professional transitions such as starting, leaving, and re-entering practice. With nearly a decade of legal experience, including roles as an assistant district attorney, assistant bar counsel at the Board of Bar Overseers, and investigator at the Office of Bar Counsel, Luz brings deep insight into lawyer regulation, ethics, and the real-world challenges of law practice. She speaks regularly for the LCL and the MCLE, and she earned her JD from the New England School of Law. So thank you both for being here. So let's get started. Luz, I'd like to start with you. Why is it important to have this fireside chat today?
I think it's very important because we are seeing a lot of anger and incivility, not only in the profession, but in cases, for example, clients getting more frustrated and less patient. Sometimes we see it when attorneys are in the courtroom and frustrations with the court process. And I think also, so we need to address that as a profession. And I think it's also worth pointing out that, especially after the pandemic, we have seen an increase in awareness in well-being and behaviors that are against well-being or counterproductive, such as bullying, angry outbursts, unregulated anger. And so the profession has pivoted slowly but noticeably towards well-being and being less accepting of this anger and outbursts and non-professional incivility. So I think we're heading towards the right direction, and we need to continue this conversation.
Excellent, excellent, Luz. Thank you for setting the stage really well. So, Shawn, let's talk about anger itself. What is anger? What happens in the brain? And what happens in the body when somebody gets angry?
Sure. So all of us are familiar with feeling anger to different degrees. And so we have that personal definition of what anger is. But so basically, anger is an emotional reaction to a threat. And we have these defense mechanisms or survival strategies ingrained in our brains that are there to protect us. Anger being one of them. When there's a threat, either real or just perceived, our amygdala, very like basic foundational part of our brain, which is the emotional alarm center, gives us signals that like there's a threat, we need to act, we need to be aware, we need to do something to protect ourselves. And so, like any emotion or any sort of reaction, I talk about them in terms of a continuum where you've got the Goldilocks zone, which is in the right amount, it's very productive, protective, advantageous, right? And below that, like not having any anger or not enough anger, there's consequences to that. Most of us err on the other side of that continuum, where too much anger or sort of like residual anger that's not resolved. That's when it becomes more problematic. And so what happens is when we're upset about something, when we're angry about some threat, our amygdala gives us these signals, the alarms go off, and then we're more focused on the threat. And when we're in the threat mode, like our sympathetic nervous system is activated. That's the fight, flight, or freeze syndrome. And so we're charged up and we're ready to act. And so acting can be sort of like outward focused, right? It's fighting the threat. It could be inward focused in terms of like freezing and not knowing what to do or not knowing how to express that feeling. And it can also be avoidance. So the flee or the flight part of that syndrome is I want to avoid it altogether to protect myself. So all of those basic reactions are about protecting me. And so when we're in survival mode, one of the things that happens is the prefrontal cortex in our brains, the front part, which we rely on for decision making, logical thinking, emotional regulation, that takes a back seat because like when you think about survival priorities, if all of a sudden if you're going about your day and you're in the grocery store and got your list of things you're trying to not forget to buy, and all of a sudden you start choking on a hard candy, like you're not thinking about your shopping list anymore, right? You're not planning out your day. All of your attention is suddenly directed towards survival. Like I need to make sure that I'm okay. And so that's a more dramatic example, but basically that's what happens when we're activated in the survival mode is the other parts of our brain that we need for logical thinking and good sound judgment, they sort of take a back seat until the threat is adequately dealt with or has passed. And so when we're upset, that's what our brain is doing physically. Like we're often experiencing anger through um, increased heart rate, shallow and increased rate of breath, increase sweating, basically all the things that you would uh, assume that you would need when you're sort of getting ready to act, right? Getting ready to run out of the burning building, getting ready to, fight off the bear that came into your yard. Don't do that, actually. You should run away from the bear. But like those sort of reactions are like, this is what I need to do to survive. And one of the interesting things about how our brains work is we will have that reaction, whether the threat is real or if it's just perceived. So it could be an imagined threat, right? And so what an imagined threat to me is very different than what it is to anybody else. And we can get into this a bit later, but like what I find threatening might be very different. So if, for example, I have an insecurity about disappointing somebody, right? Or rejection or being yelled at or what have you, like that is going to trigger my threat response differently than somebody else who doesn't have that particular experience or insecurity. And so it's important to realize that like how I perceive the world and what I find threatening is different. So, for example, if you have associates in your firm and you're trying to help them, work through a certain situation, you might find one thing threatening that they don't, and vice versa. And so it's helpful not to think about it in terms of objective threat, like, oh yeah, don't worry about that particular issue. That doesn't actually help somebody not worry about or not get angry or threatened by it. It's important to recognize that we all find different things threatening, and therefore we're going to have this reaction based on that perception.
So excellent. Thank you for being very clear. I am just wondering, is there a difference between acute, which it sounds like maybe there is, in the moment anger, and more chronic low-grade anger that simmers over time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the acute anger really is more of that traditional threat response where like something happens, I need to act in some way to preserve my safety or those around me that I care about. And then once the situation is resolved, like I return to my baseline. And so our bodies are designed to react and then return to a baseline functioning or homeostasis where we have some balance, right? And we run into problems when we're in a chronic situation where we're either continuously or repeatedly activated, and we're not able to return to that homeostasis. So one of the things that is somewhat counterintuitive is you can experience anger, not express it, but you can actually try to repress it because you don't know what is going to happen if you let it out. And sometimes people think repressing the anger is the same as dealing with it or resolving it, which it is not, right? Repressing it is like, I'm just going to take this feeling and I'm going to, tamp it down and hope that it just magically goes away. But it doesn't. So you can actually keep yourself in a chronic state or prolonged state of activation, and which actually prohibits you from getting back to that homeostasis or that balance. And so the effects are real in terms of both your physical and emotional self, but also your relationships and how you handle conflicts. So how we deal with anger can look very differently, even though like someone might on the outwardly might seem like, oh yeah, they have an anger issue because I'm seeing it a lot. Whereas someone else might be repressing it a lot. They still have an anger issue in the way that they're not dealing or addressing their anger in a healthy way for themselves, but they might be like repressing it and like holding it in because they're not sure what would happen if they let it out, or they're afraid of what might happen if they let it out.
Excellent. Thank you. And we're going to get to some of those strategies, I think, how to bring that balance back down. And you also, you were talking about earlier how when you're in that moment of intense anger, it can lead to distorted judgment or poor judgment. So, Luz, I want to ask you about how this distorted judgment plays out in practice. So, in legal strategy, client relationships, or interactions at the court.
Yes. So one thing that I liked from Shawn's description was that judgment like takes a back seat,
Yeah.
right? So that's what happens. Your judgment gets compromised when you're not able to regulate this anger. And how does that come out in the disciplinary side? There have been cases where attorneys have been disciplined because not because of the anger, it's what happens because of the anger, not the anger itself. So, for example, it distorts your judgment. And so I'm going to talk a little bit later on about the disciplinary part, but just for now, I want to tell you that it creates like a tunnel vision, and you're not able to clearly kind of assess or see the big picture in a case, for example. So all the legal theories that you could have available to resolve a legal issue or an ethical issue that you might be encountering. So you develop this tunnel vision. That's one of the things that happens, and you're only seeing, let's say, one possible solution. That might not be the best one. for resolving something in your case. Sometimes unregulated anger might take control and also will pivot towards just seeking some sort of vindication or revenge. And that's often seen with opposing counsel. Like, opposing counsel did something to me that I found, was disrespectful or what have you. But then the objective is not to represent your client and protect your client's interests. It's to seek vengeance or vindication, or sometimes the judge did something that I didn't like, and I'm angry, and I just want vengeance, retribution, vindication. He or she's wrong, I'm right, and then that takes over, and you're not able to. Sometimes the client's interests are ignored, and the attorney just goes in this path of seeking vindication, and then to the detriment of the client. Sometimes there is miscalculation of risk and overconfidence. And sometimes the attorneys don't see it right away because their judgment is impaired or compromised. And they would write, let's say, a motion or a brief that it's full of inappropriate language, or where they're doing an oral argument. They become sometimes overconfident that they think they're right, and they miscalculate the risk that, that can get you in trouble or can compromise the case and your client's interests, which is, problematic.
Yeah. No, I think that these are some serious things that we need to think about. Everybody needs to think about. And so, Shawn, you actually touched upon this earlier, but I'm hoping we can go a little bit, take a deeper dive in this. So what do you think anger really does stem from, and what's often underneath it? Again, how does it develop over time? Again, I think you talked about it a little bit more, but I'm wondering if we could go into that a little bit.
Yeah. So everyone's experience of anger has a lot to do with sort of their differences, how their makeup, their experiences, both their lived experiences growing up, what they were taught about anger, whether that's appropriate, how to express it appropriately, all the stuff like what was modeled for them. And so sort of what triggers someone to have an anger response is going to vary quite a bit. So for some of us, like what we were taught was, particularly if you had a trauma background, oftentimes the message is, if you're feeling angry, like do not express that because there's very real safety risks to expressing anger. And so as a protective mechanism in a traumatic experience, it's often that freeze response of like, I'm just going to shut down. I'm not going to express anything. I'm going to wait until it's safe. And so that pattern can extend into adulthood, where when something is threatening, instead of getting upset back and sort of giving it back, I actually shut down, and I sort of like just wait till the threat passes. For others, they might see that being angry or expressing that outwardly as effective, whether that is in my oral arguments. I'm shouting in court, and therefore I won. Therefore, I link that together with, oh, this is how you win, is you're aggressive in that way. Or my mentor showed me this is how you do it. The more aggressive you are, the more you can convince somebody of your side. So there's lots of examples of like how somebody gets to their response to anger. And so I did want to mention that hopefully this is clear, but anger is not a negative emotion, right? We often think of examples of anger in terms of the destructive response or consequences of anger, but anger can be really helpful, right? It's a protective response. For some people, they feel like, I can do things that I'm afraid of when I'm angry, right? Like I wouldn't speak up, for myself normally, but suddenly I'm angry about some injustice happening, and now I can speak up, right? And so there are very positive uses of anger or responses to anger. And I think when you're thinking about your experience of anger, it's really helpful to think like, do I feel like I have control over how I'm responding to my anger? And is this helpful or productive or positive in some way? Right? Can I distinguish between, the negative effects of anger and the positive effects of it? And so oftentimes we talk about anger as like somebody made me feel this way, right? Somebody made me feel angry, and therefore like the onus is on somebody else. And oftentimes that is the initial reaction, is like something happens and then I'm feeling threatened. I have this response of anger. So sometimes it feels like someone else caused it. And then, now I have to deal with someone else's behavior that caused me to feel anger. So in a lot of cases, that is how it happens, or someone else does something, or something happens. I have this reaction. But it's really helpful in terms of managing your own experience of anger to feel like you can step in with your sense of control and be like, I might have this reaction initially, but now I need to assess, like, do I want this to be the driving force of my decision? Right. And the more that I feel like I have options, I know that I can regulate, when I feel like I can regulate my experience, then I feel more control. If it's helpful to act in anger in terms of like standing up for an injustice, and I'm going to use this anger for something good, that's a very different experience than, I wanted to negotiate in good faith, but now I'm angry and now I'm being vindictive, and like I don't want, that wasn't my goal initially, but now I feel like compelled, almost like I don't have control. And so those distinctions are really important. And again, we can get into sort of strategies for how to recognize when that's happening and what you can do about it. But I'm not even sure if I'm answering your original question at this point, but I think it's really helpful that sense of awareness of like, oh, my experience of anger might be different than somebody else's, right? And it is helpful to know like what works for other people in terms of, working through their anger. But it's also really helpful for you to have a clear sense of like what's behind my anger. Is it something that I'm misinterpreting a situation? Am I taking something personally that's not actually personal? Is it an insecurity that I have? Like somebody is saying something that's really tapping at an insecurity that I have. Maybe they don't even know that, but I'm having a reaction out of this insecurity. Maybe they do know it and they're trying to get a reaction out of me. Right? We talked earlier about, the strategy that some lawyers have used to like threaten to call the BBO as a way of manipulating opposing counsel, which don't do that. That's bad. Luz can talk about why that's bad, but
I'll tell you why.
okay,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, this is actually, I don't want to cut you off, Shawn, if
No,
you have more
please
to
go.
say, but it's a good segue. Luz, we see this happen a lot. So Luz, talk to us about when people threaten to call the BBO. What is that about?
Yes. So there is a rule actually that prohibits an attorney from making a threat to bring disciplinary charges or criminal charges solely to gain advantage in a private matter. So we see attorneys often, very angry and bullish. I'm going to report you to the BBO. Well, you have to be careful because you're making that threat in order to solely gain an advantage for your a private matter. That's a rule violation. Okay, that's a rule violation. So you have to tread carefully, and there has been discipline imposed for attorneys who have done that, just to to try to manipulate or force an outcome or in a private matter, in their client's matter. This is the same with criminal charges. Sometimes an attorney might say, I'm going to bring criminal charges against you. It's the same. It's the same rule applies. And then, yes, go ahead.
Nope. I was just going to ask, because this is a great real life example of, what happens with maybe it's bullying, anger. Maybe talk about some other real life examples where people can either, and there are extremes, right? Maybe be disciplined, suspended, disbarred. So can you talk about some of these situations that could lead to these serious consequences?
Yes. So again, it's not the anger itself, it's what you do with the anger. So for example, an attorney who goes into a courtroom and starts, saying profanities to the clerk magistrate or the assistant clerk, the session clerk, that, you can get admonished for that. There's precedent for that. You can get at least an admonition for that. Attorneys who get angry and then start making derogatory remarks towards opposing counsel, their clients, again, that attorneys have been disciplined for making these derogatory remarks in a case, in a matter. So you can be disciplined for that type of conduct while you're practicing law. Also, there's some interesting cases where attorneys get negative online reviews. Now that everything is a review, right? They get angry. They could get angry because there's a negative online review, and then they start replying to the negative online review. And when they do that, they start breaching confidentiality and disclosing confidential information. You can get disciplined for that. So, and then there's other conduct that it's the result of unmanaged or uncontrolled anger, but it's not within the practice of law. So this is in your personal life. For example, and then that conduct is criminal and leads to a conviction in court, a criminal conviction. And for purposes of the BBO discipline, a conviction can be a continuance without a finding. It's not just, or a nolo, no contest. It's not just a guilty finding or guilty plea. So if, for example, you're the perpetrator of domestic violence and there's an assault and battery charge against you, and you do a continuance without a finding, or there's a guilty finding, number one, you have to report that conviction to the BBO within 10 days of the conviction, and that could lead to discipline. And it could range from, reprimand, suspension. Of course, the more serious the conduct and the more violations, the discipline will be more severe. You get into a fist fight, even if it's in a bar, with a neighbor dispute, and you're trying to, ram them over with your vehicle, and that's a crime. So even conduct that is outside the practice of law that leads to a criminal conviction could be the basis for discipline.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Now, a lot of people out there I know are asking for strategies. Their strategies in the moment, how to deal with that anger, calm down, return to baseline, and then also some strategies to prevent this anger from rearing its ugly head, if you will. So Shawn, can you share from the psychological perspective some of these strategies?
Yeah. So in terms of short-term strategies, there's lots of things that could be helpful. Again, the caveat is you should sort of practice some to see what is most effective for you, because what works for one might not be as effective for somebody else. So in the moment strategies, again, thinking back to what our brains are actually doing when we're feeling this threat is we're in threat mode. We're in the fight, flight, or freeze syndrome. So when we can shift out of that response, even though that response is automatic, it's like hardwired into us as a protective response, we actually have control over regulating it and shifting out of it. So some strategies that help for that are breathing, right? We're breathing anyway. Our breath when we're activated is shallow and fast. So by focusing on our breathing and just slowing our breath and making it deeper, what we're doing is we're sending signals to our brain. We're taking conscious control over our breathing, which is sending signals to our brain that says, this is not how I breathe when I'm under threat. This is how I breathe when I'm calm, when I'm confident. And so just focusing on our breath can help us make that shift. Other in the moment strategies can be like muscle relaxation, sort of like the same idea, where like my muscles are tense when I'm angry or I'm feeling threat. If I consciously just relax my muscles, I'm going to physically feel relaxed. And again, I'm sending messages to my brain that this is not how I feel. This is not what my muscles do when I'm under attack. This is how I feel when I'm calm and confident. Um, you can activate your vagal nerve by applying cold. So sometimes just like splashing cold water in your face, holding an ice cube
Oh.
today, like going outside and grabbing some snow, right? Like the experience of cold temperature is one strategy that helps activate the vagal nerve, which shifts us out of that response. Other things are like having a strategy of inserting a pause. And so when we're in a situation where we're feeling anger or someone is sort of bullying or expressing anger at us, again, to sort of get to the point where I can be using my prefrontal cortex more as opposed to just reacting out of that threat, inserting a pause can give me that opportunity to do a lot of things, whether that's the breathing or another strategy, which we'll talk about in a minute. Like injecting a pause could be like, oh, instead of responding immediately, I'm going to count to 10. Or like somebody just emailed me and now I'm feeling enraged because they're really disrespectful to me. Instead of firing back an email, I'm actually going to get up and walk away from my computer, take a moment, take myself out of the situation if I can, and then return to it after I'm feeling a little more calm. Um, Other strategies are like a lot of the situations that sort of get us to react in anger, that threat sometimes is due to the somebody else, and sometimes it's has something to do with us, right?
Mm.
So oftentimes when somebody does something to upset me, I have to think like, is that person's behavior, is it really related to me? Right? I'm reacting as if it is,
Mm.
right? Someone's upset, they were disrespectful to me, they cut me off in traffic, which is one of my favorite things to be done in traffic is being cut off. But like if I'm able to interpret it differently, right? If I'm able to say like that person's reaction has nothing to do with me, they are having a bad day, or they were being careless, or they didn't see me, right? It wasn't intentional. Like that's just something that's a mistake that they made, right? Or they just got terrible news and now they're just like they can't handle it and I'm the recipient of that emotion, right?
Mm.
When I can separate somebody's action from my interpretation or response, suddenly I feel a greater sense of safety because I'm not under threat in the same way because it doesn't have anything to do with me. It has to do with them. That's one way of interpreting it differently, where I can say like, oh, this is not personal. I don't have to react as if I'm under threat. I can act as an observer of what's going on, not as a participant.
Mm.
There are also times when my anger reaction has to do with me, like it's an insecurity that I have, right? Like someone is criticizing me for something that I actually feel really insecure about, all right? Or I feel like they're not being kind when I was trying to be kind to them, and I have this sense that like, I have a value that if I'm being kind to you, you shouldn't be unkind in return, and that's something that gets stirred up in me. Um, when that when I'm aware that it has something to do with me, then I can address that in a different way, which is, if it's an insecurity, I can sort of confront that. Like, this is why I'm feeling this way. I am secure about my inexperience in this area, right?
Mm.
I don't need to feel a threat from it, but I do need to recognize that I do feel insecure. I don't have the confidence that I want to have in this area. That's okay because I'm building, my confidence over time, or however you want to respond to that. And then there's times when it's both, right? It's like it's all about that other person. They're having a bad day, but they happen to also, you know, activate an insecurity or a fear that I have, or like they're triggering something in me where, they're having a bad day, has nothing to do with me, but they raise their voice at me, and that triggers me because, like, from my past experiences, like that was a trigger. Like when someone starts yelling, it's like, okay, that's not safe for me anymore. So now I've got both things. And so you could address that in terms of, again, in the moment, trying to regulate your nervous system response as well as try to reinterpret the situation differently. That's a tall ask, by the way, to do both of those things at the same time. So I would prioritize like regulating your nervous system first, right? Trying to take a pause, um, things like that. So, like in the moment, one of the sort of like the foundational skill is having an awareness of yourself, right? Like this is what my reaction is. This is what I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling this way, right? And this is what I can do about it. So in the moment, there are things you might want to do. Another sort of in the moment thing is to have like sometimes it's called an anchor or like a mantra, or like something that is a reminder to you that you're going to make a transition away from anger, and you're going to make a transition to more like calming. So sometimes it's a word or a phrase, or sometimes it's a literal object. We're like, oh, I'm going to like hold this object, and this is a physical reminder that I'm going to focus on my breathing, or like try to maintain my safety first, and then approach the situation. So there's various things that you can do for short-term stuff. And then in terms of long-term or longer-term strategies, one of the things that's helpful is knowing or being able to recognize patterns, right? So for me, there are certain things that are going to make me angry that aren't going to make somebody else angry. And again, that has to do with, me, my history, my experiences, how I interact in the world, my values. And so if I'm paying attention, I'll be able to recognize patterns like, oh, this is a thing for me. This is a trigger or an issue, right? And full disclosure, one of mine is I try to be a courteous driver. You can interpret that however you want. And I have this expectation that courtesy will be returned. Like, oh, like I know how to drive. I think everyone should know how to drive. Therefore, if someone doesn't return my courteous behavior, that is like a violation to my principles. Like, how dare you? And so I'm aware of that. And so I know that for myself all the time. But what's helpful is if I'm aware that I didn't get a good night's sleep last night, I know that my ability to handle stress is less than if I get a good night's sleep. And
Mm,
so, or if I'm hungry, or if I'm both, I'm tired and I'm hungry and I'm frustrated about something else that happened, right? That's a recipe for me to overreact or to misinterpret something that in a different situation I could interpret differently, I could respond to differently. And really, what's helpful in those moments is just having that awareness like, oh, this is why I'm feeling this way,
mm,
right? If suddenly I realize that I was in a fine mood and now I'm angry all of a sudden, if I don't know why, it's easy for me to interpret that reaction as, oh, it must be due to what just happened. Somebody else did something that warrants this big reaction. However, if I'm aware that I didn't sleep well last night, I'm hungry and I'm frustrated, and all of a sudden I'm really angry, I'm like, oh, that makes more sense that it's probably due more to those other things that are going on for me and less about what just happened. That's just the straw that the camel's back, so to
mm,
speak. And so even though I'm feeling that increase of anger, I have the opportunity to inject that pause, like, oh, I'm recognizing this feeling. I know there's other factors. I know that this person doesn't deserve my rage or hatred. It's just like a mistake that they made. Therefore, even though I'm feeling frustrated, I can start to feel less anger just with that awareness that, oh, this is why I'm having this reaction. And I think one of the things that, um, again, can be counterintuitive is when you're feeling anger, sometimes it feels like in order for this feeling to be resolved, I have to do something. And sometimes that thing that I have to do is counterproductive, right? So like
Mm.
blowing up at somebody or yelling back at somebody, it could feel good. We can actually get a dopamine boost from
Mm.
like expressing it outwardly like that. And
That's right.
therefore that can become like addictive. Like, oh yeah, this felt good. I felt justified. And I've heard stories of lawyers like, you know, something happened in the courtroom where maybe a judge said something that legitimately was unfair, right? Or like inappropriate. And they felt justified in responding with a lot of anger. It was like, whoa, that your anger was a bit much, right? And that
Mm.
gets them in trouble, even though the original reason for that reaction might have been justified in terms of identifying some injustice. Um, and so if I have a sense of, you know, what else I can do with this feeling, with this emotional reaction, then I'm less likely to get myself in trouble. I'm less likely to damage my relationships. I mentioned earlier that another reaction to anger is repressing it. It's like, I don't want to express it. I'm going to let it simmer. And that has other consequences where like if my anger is simmering and I'm not talking about it or addressing it, then I'm at this lower level of chronic anger where like resentment builds, right?
Mm.
Or it's almost like I'm keeping a tally of offenses. And then eventually that anger is going to come out. And it's usually going to come out at a time or in response to something that isn't that big of a deal, but like I've reached my limit. I can't hold any more in. And all of a sudden like spills out. And so you've got that pattern as well. Um, Let me pause there because I'm going on and on about this, but um, I'll pause there.
Well,
Take a
first of
deep
all,
breath, Shawn.
yeah, right. Count to 10. Um, this was really great. I think, again, a lot of people recognize that they have anger issues, whether it is, again, in the moment or some underlying simmering anger. So I think it's incredibly helpful for people to have these strategies and takeaways. And by the way, what was actually so interesting and surprising to me was the cold and how that can calm the vagus nerve. So that is one thing because yes, I have known to get angry. That is a good technique that I think I'm going to put into place. So again, we talked about the psychological aspects. I'm wondering, Luz, from a legal standpoint, um, what are effective ways that lawyers or judges can pause, de-escalate, or redirect themselves without hurting their credibility? So in the moment, from a legal
Yeah, no,
strategy.
I would say you can, everything that Shawn just said, you can apply it in the moment. And for
Yeah.
example, for me, I do like a combination of some of the things that Shawn mentioned. So I'm very visual. And the way I learned about how the brain works, everything that he explained, and I saw the little pictures. So what I envision, what I do is I take the deep breath and I envision the emotion coming from here to the front
Mm.
as I'm breathing. I'm like, okay, get out of the fight and flight, and I have that visual in my mind as I'm breathing. Come to the front, right? Come to the front because that's when you're gonna keep your cool. Um, that's something that I do, that I've learned, over the years. The other thing, that I tell lawyers, is that no, and this is a rule that I lived by when I was practicing. No client is worth your reputation or your license, your meal ticket. It's like that
Mm.
number one rule. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And to the point that, I've seen attorneys where the client is saying, I don't want to go this route. I want to go this route. And they lose track of that. And they're like in this, with this tunnel vision. And it's unfortunate. And then you get in trouble. Like no client is worth your reputation or your license. So
Mm-hmm.
start with that. And then your health. They will go on, everything will go on. And then your health is what, it takes a toll on you also, not just mentally, but physically. So in the moment, depending on the context of the situation and what happens, sometimes, and I have to give credit to Shawn, but this is true. Sometimes some light humor eases things, but again, it depends. It depends the context and what's happening. Sometimes, like, hey, you know what? Just relax. There's no need to be nasty. Sometimes I say, it's no need to be mean or nasty. Like, hey, chill out. But again, that depends on the context. I think that reminding yourself, for example, especially when attorneys are dealing, let's say, with pro se litigants, there's more pro se litigants out there. There's going to be more with AI and ChatGPT. They're going to build their case with AI, and that could be very frustrating. So you have to remember, in addition, that you have to keep your cool. You're the professional here. You're held to a higher standard, and you're a professional, so you have to be above any pettiness or behavior that it's uncalled for. Like, don't get down to that level. Like, remember, you're the professional here, and you're expected to be conducting as a professional. And again, with the clients, I think you have to manage your clients. Sometimes it's okay, let them vent. You vented, okay, fine, let's talk about the case now. And you have to kind of manage, and you have to also be very aware and mindful of client selection and client management. So if you get a client that is very angry and very difficult to deal with, think twice whether you want to take that case, because it doesn't get better. I'm telling you, the cases don't get better. And then you develop that resentment that Shawn mentioned, and then sometimes you shut down and you avoid the person. Then the next thing that happens is that you're neglecting the case, and everything snowballs from there. So think about which clients you take on, and set the expectations clear from the beginning. For example, I know attorneys in family law, they will, have in the fee agreement, if verbal abuse or, violence or disrespectful behavior toward the staff is cause for, ending the relationship. I know of that. I'm not saying you have to put it in the fee agreement, but at least managing from the beginning, like, that behavior is not tolerated, and it will lead to withdrawal of representation.
Luz, great pieces of advice. And one thing a few things that stood out, but I'll mention client selection, right? So you do have that choice to accept a client or not. So I thought, again, that was a really good point. If somebody knows that maybe they have some anger issues, or even not, that if something could be triggering. So we are really close to time. I have a couple more questions. So, and then I also want to open it up to questions from the audience. But so I was hoping both of you could answer this. So how can you get help? So from a legal standpoint, how can lawyers or judges seek help safely and confidentially? And how does early intervention often prevent a disciplinary involvement? And then, Shawn, if somebody needs to get outside help, where and when should they start to seek outside help? So, Luz, maybe we can start with you. Again, it's recognizing that folks have an issue, but where can they get that help and feel that it is going to be confidential?
I would say start with LCL, right? It's free and confidential.
Right answer.
Right? Doing the plug here. Start here. I mean, for example, I like Tracy's mindfulness practice. I think, like, I cannot do meditation, and mindfulness is not meditation. Mindfulness is just being aware. That's something that I've learned over the years. Be compassionate. Like, I know my limitations. I can't do meditation, but I'm working on awareness. So I would say start with us, schedule a consult. And we have great people on staff that will guide you through, some of the techniques, guide you to point you to resources. I think we have to make this develop the good habit at least of protecting ourselves, because you can't serve your client when you are burnt out and anger, and like Shawn said, the relationships, both personal relationships and professional relationships suffer. And you don't want to develop the reputation for that nasty, angry person that can't give a continuance, the first continuance. Like, no, I mean, we try to be professional, like I said, and just so start with developing the awareness. If you struggle, reach out to us. We'll be happy to talk to you, and take it from there.
Shawn, any comments on?
Yeah. So in addition to that, I would say in terms of like when to seek help, obviously LCL is a good resource. Talking to a clinician, particularly one that has experience with an area that's relevant to you. So if that's anger management, if that is trauma history, if that is, relationship issues or resentment, like all of those could apply. Mentors, if you have a good mentor who not just, has been successful in their practice area, but also someone who understands like how to deal with conflict, how to do that in a healthy way, in a confident way. Obviously, mentors vary, or supervisors vary. So if you have that as a resource for you, I encourage people to make that part of their normal conversations with supervisors or mentors. Like, this is how I'm responding in this situation. Like, how would you respond, or how would you, how can I think about this differently if my response wasn't that helpful, or if I don't feel equipped to deal with these situations the way that I want to. So getting that outside perspective is helpful. Yeah, so I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you both, by the way, for great information, great advice. I learned a lot, and we certainly don't want to see Shawn hangry. We know that.
It's not a pretty sight.
It's not pretty. But again, really helpful information, great strategies. I think that's what people are really, among everything else we talked about, but I think that was important. So I do want to open it up to questions. I know officially time-wise, we're close to 5 o'clock, but I think if folks can stay on and want to stay on a little bit longer, there is a great question I'd like to read. And this person asks, if I'm involved in a conflict with another lawyer or a client who's angry at me, but I'm not angry, what can I do to diffuse the other person's anger?
That's a great question. So my first thought is to be aware of, like, what are you feeling in those situations? So if you're not angry, like, how would you describe how you're feeling? Because that's important too. Like, if you're not feeling angry, but if you're feeling uncomfortable, or if you're feeling confident, whatever it is, it's important to start there. One of the things that can be really helpful is modeling for the person what it is that you want to see in return. That doesn't guarantee that's what you're going to get in return, but oftentimes we can model a calm voice. We can like lower the tone of our voice, or speak slower, in order to encourage someone else to reciprocate. And we have these mirror neurons where when somebody starts to do something, we often will start to mimic that, even unconsciously. So if someone's angry at me, but I'm not angry, and I can start to lower my voice, I can use active listening, because sometimes when somebody's really upset, it's their way of expressing the thought that they're not feeling heard or validated. And so this is very common in conflicts and in relationships, where someone's trying to communicate something important to me, but they don't feel like I'm understanding. And so if they're feeling under pressure, they might start to get angry because like, Shawn's not understanding me. So focusing on validation, which is I hear what you're saying, and this is what I think you're feeling, or this is why I think it's so significant that you're expressing this. When I'm offering validation, that's a really effective way to disarm somebody or make them feel less threatened, right? And so if someone's really upset at me, but I'm not upset, that's a key that they actually feel threatened. They're, I'm not the one being threatened, right?
Mm.
It's a counterintuitive way of interpreting someone being angry at me. Like, wait, they're the threat. They're angry at me. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's them feeling threatened by me because they see me as the powerful one or the one who needs to understand, and I'm not understanding. And
Mm.
so sometimes techniques like that can be helpful. Sometimes just setting a boundary to let them know that like you might feel out of control right now, but I'm going to demonstrate how to be in control. And one way I do that is by having a boundary, which might be, I'm going to pause this conversation because this is getting really heated and it's not being
Mm.
productive right now. I'm going to call you back in 5 minutes. Encourage you to take time just to do what you need, get a drink, take a breath, but I want to get back to the conversation, but this isn't productive right now. Or, I don't let somebody talk to me like that. I feel disrespected when somebody talks to me like that, but I want to hear what you're going to say. But right now I'm going to have a boundary, or I'm going to end the conversation, but I'm going to call you back just to like reset, right? Sometimes demonstrating some healthy control like that not only is good for you, but it helps that other person feel like there's some boundaries of where they can operate and set some expectations. Again, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to respond well to that. Sometimes people get upset when you have a boundary. That's okay. They'll recover. But feeling like you have control over your response is really helpful. Um, and then it really depends on if you feel like this person is expressing something, really important to them, or are they doing something like we mentioned earlier? Are they angry at you and trying to manipulate you to, influence your decision on something?
Mm.
That's different. And you might have a different strategy, which you might call their bluff. So we mentioned, lawyers threatening to call the BBO on another lawyer. And my recommendation in those situations is always like, oh, here's the number. If you feel like you need to call the BBO on me, here's the number, or let's call together. Right. And oftentimes, like, all right, forget that. Right. So if you think that that reaction is trying to bully you or manipulate you, there might be something else that might be helpful to sort of diffuse it and be like, let's just nip this in the bud.
Great answer. And by the way, these things are not necessarily easy,
No.
right? Especially in the heat of the moment. And I will say that happens to me as well. So, but these again are great tips to use. We do have a comment. Somebody says, thank you for pointing out that my unmet expectations lead to my reactions and that I'm in control of my expectations. Personally, I feel like I have the duty to be sure everyone is a courteous driver. And if they aren't, I take it so personally. Yep. It's a justice thing, but you are so right, Shawn. I'm still the one feeling all of this. I expect courteous behavior. And when I don't get it, I feel like I have to correct the person. And then also the comment is it's quite fun to be angry on the road when doing so in the name of fairness. Yes, the dopamine rush. But thank you for making this person aware. Yeah, I mean, driving while angry is a real thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think those are some really good points in terms of like knowing what your expectations are and realizing that that is my expectation. That's something that I am putting on somebody else or the world. And if my expectations are too rigid or unrealistic or unforgiving, like I'm basically setting myself up to experience threat when I don't need to, right? Or anger or injustice when I don't need to. If my expectations aren't serving me in that way, where I'm like, I'm angry every time I get in the car, well, then maybe
Mm.
I would benefit personally from adjusting my expectations so that I could actually feel a little more peace or joy or connection with other people and other drivers in my community. To your point, Amy, harder than that it sounds sometimes, but there are some real benefits to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I would have to say that mindfulness has helped me with the driving. I still struggle with some anger. I have to confess as well. But a couple of things for me is that, for example, I leave ample time, so I'm not rushing. So leaving ample time, driving time, and I know that, traffic, I'm always in traffic if I go to Boston. So I know that. So I leave ample time, and that reduces the stress and the anger. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm such a good driver. And I'm like, I have no rush. There's no rush for me, and so I've managed a little bit better that anger, when I'm driving by being a little bit more mindful, allowing time, and kind of patting myself in the back, like, oh, I'm not speeding. I'm obeying the rules of the road. Like, look at me, you know. Works
Maybe
sometimes, not always.
maybe my everybody should do what my niece does and don't drive. But just I wanted to go back again. I recognize we are a little bit over time. One of the things is maybe talking to a clinician, really finding out about your triggers and thinking about that and recognizing that. And I think that is quite helpful in being able to not feel it or understand a little bit more. So I think that was a really good point. And again, I would encourage folks to call LCL and schedule some time with one of the clinicians. We have 4, so there's definitely some nice options there. Again, we are out of time, but quickly, any last minute comments you think people should know or
Yeah,
anything?
I just want to make one more comment, which is when Luz was talking about like visualizing bringing like the feeling to the front of her brain to be calm. Sometimes we can misinterpret being calm as being passive, right?
Mm,
Or being weak, whereas anger is strong, calm is weak or passive, and that is not the case at all. When you are consciously controlling how you feel and having an effect on your ability to regulate, you're actually enacting a lot of control, which is one of the most like powerful things you can do. So when you feel like someone else can be angry and I don't have to be, like that is empowering to feel
mm,
like I decide how I feel and what I do. I don't let you decide for me. That's really empowering. However, the reason why you're doing it matters a lot, right? So if I'm staying calm or projecting calm in order to feel confident is one thing. If I'm projecting calm because I'm afraid and I'm trying to just, freeze, that's a very different experience. And so the reason why you're doing something is really important to keep in mind.
Luz, thank you, Shawn. That was a great comment. Luz, anything else before we end the
Yes.
conversation?
Yes, the mimicking technique that works. And
Mm,
I would say it works like 98% of the times. There will be some times that it doesn't work, but it could be the other person might have some challenges. So that could be, but most of the time, and I've used that technique when I, was dealing with very angry complainants. Um, and just mimicking and setting the boundary, saying, okay, you know what? I don't think we're getting anywhere here. And I think, why don't we take a break and I'll
mm.
give you a call tomorrow. How's that? And that works, I would say 98% of the time. If
That's
you
a great
escalate it,
example.
then it will keep escalating. And then to come back down, it's very difficult and that it's draining. The thing also that anger is draining, it drains you.
Mm,
It drains you
exhausting, yeah.
emotionally. Like, yeah, and that's one of the things that because anger really, for me, it's really draining. So I'm like, no, 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 no. I need to control this and manage it, not repress it, you have to manage it.
Yeah. Well, Luz, that was a great example. And I also want to let our viewers know that we will be providing some information on the strategies that were mentioned here today. So you can review them, have them in front of you. And that should be this presentation will be posted on our website. And so shortly thereafter, we will be able to provide those techniques and tips and tools and strategies. Thank you both so much for this conversation. It was incredibly useful. I think this is an area sometimes that's not talked about. So I'm so happy, and very common, by the way, as we see everybody talking about, yes, we all get angry. So I think it was incredibly helpful. I'm glad that we did have this open conversation about it. And again, thank you all for joining us, and hopefully you were able to get some really good takeaways.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you
everyone.
so much. Bye-bye.